How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the PatriotDIY channel. Spring is almost here, and for me and my son that means the start of a new baseball season. So in this video I'm going to show you how to install your own backyard batting cage. Alright guys, so for the last few weeks I've been working hard building what I think is the ultimate backyard batting cage. So if you have kids that play baseball or softball and this is something that you're interested in doing in your backyard, in this video I'm going to show you step by step the best way to do this, from the base to the poles to the net and even some accessories to go along with it. I did a lot of research to find high quality materials at an affordable price, and I will have links to all the tools we use for this build along with the net, the accessories, the turf, and everything else linked in the description below if you want to get this stuff for yourself. We'll talk about the proper base or foundation for your batting cage, which is probably one of the most important considerations, and of course I'm going to show you how to do it. But first guys, if you haven't done it yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below, hit that notification bell, and give us a thumbs up. Alright guys, now first I want to talk about the cage frame itself. This is the 2 1/4 inch deluxe commercial cable frame kit from Cimarron Sports. This is a great option, especially for you DIYers out there, and it's going to save you a lot of money versus a complete frame. So what you get with this kit is all of your corner pieces, your transitions, ground sleeves, cables, and all your hardware. All these components are made of 2 1/4 inch 14 gauge galvanized steel, so it's going to be super strong. Now the way this kit saves you money is that it allows you to source your own 10-foot pipe for the verticals and the horizontals. And what you're going to use for that is a 2-inch EMT conduit. That's a 14 gauge galvanized steel pipe that you can easily find at your local Home Depot or Lowe's. So that's the only additional thing I needed for this kit, was 9 of the 2-inch by 10-foot EMT conduit and 4 of the 1.5-inch by 10-foot EMT conduit for your angled support. Everything else that you need for this comes with that kit from Cimarron Sports. My frame is 15.5 foot wide by 55 foot long. So for that size, you'll see what you end up with is 3 arches and 4 angled supports with cables in between. I love the design of this because it's super easy to hang your net on those cables, and these angled supports allow you to have a really strong, sturdy frame without having to have cables coming off the ends of your batting cage. If you've ever had any experience with your kids around a batting cage that has those cables coming off the end, you'll know they are a major trip hazard. So with the design of this frame, it eliminates the need for those cables coming off the ends while still keeping it very sturdy. The next big consideration is what you're going to use for the base of your batting cage. Now obviously you can just throw your poles up in your yard on whatever grass you already have, but that's really not the best option. Obviously you are going to have to cut the grass under something like that. It's very unlikely that that surface is going to be nice and flat and level, and of course you're going to run into a lot of times where it's just nasty and muddy in there, and the more you use it and hit in it, you're going to start to see holes and divots dug out, especially in your hitting area. You could also consider concrete, but that's probably going to be the most expensive option, and you also end up with a lot of drainage issues because obviously water is not going to drain through that concrete. So what I've done here I think is probably your best option, and that's a raised gravel base. I'm going to get in here and show you exactly how I did this in just a minute, but the benefits of this is it doesn't matter what the slope of your yard is, it doesn't matter how flat your yard is, because we're going to build this up and we're going to be able to perfectly flatten and level the whole thing. The type of gravel that we're going to use for this is going to pack down nice and hard, really similar to what you're going to get from concrete, but it's also going to allow water to drain through it, so you never have to worry about your batting cage holding water and being wet and muddy. Now on top of my gravel base, I decided to go with turf grass from ATX Turf. This is a very high quality outdoor turf. It drains extremely well, so it doesn't hold any water. It's also very realistic looking. What you have here is about a 2-inch blade of grass. You can see it also has some brown thatch down on the inside just to give it some thickness, help those blades of grass remain straight up rather than laying down. And I think it also gives it a lot more realistic grass look. ATX Turf was super helpful with this project. They have a full section on their website dedicated to batting cages. So on their website, it'll give you a full rundown of the proper base material you need for your batting cage. They also provide several different sizes of batting cage kits as well. All right guys, now we've talked about the materials I used to build this batting cage, let's get to work and I'll show you step by step exactly how I did it. First thing we need to do is mark out the location for our batting cage base. For my 55 by 14 batting cage, I'm going with a base of 60 foot by 16 foot. Now once you've measured and marked out your four corners, you need to verify that everything is square, and to do that you're just going to measure from one corner to the opposite corner and then do the same on the other side. If both of those numbers match, then that means you are perfectly square. You're also going to want to extend that edge line about 2 foot in either direction past your corner. This will make more sense in just a minute. Now my yard does have a slope to it, so to measure out what that slope is, I'm going to be using my Johnson laser level. I'm going to start the laser at the highest point, then go and measure each of my other 3 corners to determine how much drop I have. This is important because it's going to let me know how much lumber I need for the frame of my base. It's also going to help me determine how much gravel I need. And my little buddy's going to help me out here by marking the edge of the perimeter with some orange paint. Once I have all that done, the next thing I'm going to do is try to get all this grass out of the area. That's going to help me make sure my gravel packs down nice and hard. It's also going to help prevent that grass and weeds from coming up later in the future. Now I will admit this tractor is not the perfect tool for this, but it did get the job done. Now once I've got most of that grass off, I'm going to go back with my flat shovel and just kind of clean up the edges along that orange paint line that we marked earlier. Now for the frame of my base, I'm going to be using 4x6s. These are going to go around the perimeter of the base, and we're going to fill that with our gravel later. But before we can put down our 4x6 frame, we need to flatten out and level the edges where those 4x6s are going to go. Once I've done that, I'm going to go back to those marks that we extended past our corners earlier and stretch out my string line. You can see that I dug out past that corner, so now when I put in my 4x6s, I can align them with this string and know that everything is perfectly straight and square. Now I'm ready to start dropping my 4x6s in place. I'm going to start at my lowest corner. That's very important. I'm going to show you why in just a second. So I'm going to drop that 4x6 in place and then go ahead and check the level. And then I'll go back and dig out a little more anywhere I need to until I can get that level. Now you'll notice to the right of the screen is my lowest corner, and that 4x6 is basically going to be sitting right on top of the ground, and I'm digging out towards the higher ground. Once I've done that, I'm going to drop it back in place and align it with that string line and check for level one more time. Once I'm sure that it's good, I can move on to the next one. Again, I'm starting here at this lowest corner, verifying that each piece is level before I move on. And here at the corner, I'm going to secure these pieces together with a 90-degree bracket and lag screws. Now I'm just going to continue this process all the way around the perimeter for my first layer of 4x6s. Now at every transition where 2 boards meet, I'm going to fasten those together with some metal strapping. I'm using 16-foot 4x6s for this, so once I reach the other end, I am going to need to cut this down, and that's easy enough with a circular saw and a Sawzall. Now this is why I started at the lowest corner. You'll notice by the time I got this bottom 4x6 leveled out, the other end was already below the surface, so I'm going to need to build that end up, and I'm just going to lay another 4x6 right on top of the one I started with, and that's going to meet up perfectly with my high side. Now I did have some help for this project, but somewhere along the way my helpers got a little distracted. But now we're back at it. Now, as I'm putting on my second layer of 4x6s, I want to stagger the seams. So you see I'm putting on a shorter piece here to start this run. Also, as I'm doing this, I need to fasten my second layer to the bottom layer. And to do that, I'm going to be using these 8-inch lag screws. And I just continue that process the same way I did the bottom layer. You're going to need at least 4 inches of gravel for it to pack down properly. So when you're building this up, you want to make sure you go up at least 4 inches. Once I've done that, I'm just going to go back and rake this and try to smooth it out the best I can. All right, we got the frame for our base built. Everything is level. You can see this bottom side is quite a bit lower than the top side because of the slope. But all of our boards are set in place. They're all secured together. Now we need to get them secured to the ground. So I'm going to cut some rebar and we're going to run some rebar in probably every 8 feet. Let's get to it. I'm going to be using 1/2-inch rebar for this, and I'm going to cut it down into 24-inch sections. To install these, I'm going to use a 1/2-inch auger bit to drill all the way through the layers of my frame, and then I proceed to spend the rest of the day busting my tail driving all this rebar in. But now I need to prep this for gravel. So I'm gonna go around and pack down this dirt as much as I can with a plate compactor. This is the perfect tool for this, and you can rent these at any Home Depot store. All right guys, now just to recap on what we've done so far. We marked out our area, scraped all the grass off the top, built our frame around the outside, secured that to the ground, and then we packed down the dirt real good. Now, as I'm sure you can tell, the ground here is not perfectly smooth and level, and it doesn't have to be because we're gonna be filling this with several inches of gravel and leveling that. But before we put down the gravel, I'm gonna get in here and put down a weed barrier just to help make sure that we don't get grasses and weeds growing up through the gravel over time. So I'm gonna get started doing that, and then we'll get the gravel in here. So I'm gonna roll out that weed barrier fabric and begin securing it to the frame using this hammer stapler around the edges just to help hold it in place until we get the gravel in here. Then to secure it to the ground in the middle, I'm going to drive in some of these landscaping staples. Now the poles for my batting cage are going to sit inside of this frame. So the other thing I need to do before the gravel comes is dig the holes for those poles. For this, I'm using an 8-inch auger, and then after that, I'll clean up the holes with post hole diggers. I'm going about 24 inches deep here, and then I'm going to drop in one of these 8-inch concrete forms. Once that's done, we are ready for gravel. Now it is very important that you use the correct type of gravel for this. What you want is a crushed 89 size stone or pea gravel, 3/8 of an inch or smaller. Now you'll notice this is not round river stone. Any type of rounded stones will not pack down well. What you need is a crushed stone that has jagged edges. So when you go back and you pack this down later, it packs down nice and hard, but still allows water to drain through it. Now, just in case you were curious, it took 2 full dump truck loads of gravel to fill this, and I have my work cut out for me spreading this. I'm just going to go at it with a rake, spreading this around. I'm also going to be going back with that plate compactor every now and then, packing it down as I go to make sure my end result is packed down nice and hard with minimal settling. Once I've got it all spread out and leveled the best I can, I'm going to go back and screed the top. That's going to help me knock down any high spots and fill any low spots. And then finally, I go back over everything a few more times with that plate compactor to make sure everything is packed down nice and flat. Once that's done, I'm ready to set my poles. Now this kit from Cimarron Sports comes with ground sleeves for your poles, so what I'm actually going to be setting here is the ground sleeve. So I'm going to pour a little water down into the bottom first, then fill it about halfway with concrete, and then pour a little more water, mix it the best I can, and keep filling it that way until I get near the top. Then I'm going to drop in that ground sleeve and push it down into that concrete. It is going to be important that each of these is set to the same height. So I just have some blocks here that I'm using as a guide to set this to the height that I want. Now before the concrete sets, I do need to make sure this is going to be level. So I'm going to go ahead and drop in one of my poles and use that to hold my level against and make any adjustments that I need to make. Once I've satisfied that this pole is nice and plumb, I'm going to go ahead and fill it the rest of the way with the concrete and then wet it and then just wait for it to set. Now to make sure I set these poles the correct distance apart, I'm going to go ahead and pre-assemble one of my arches, and I'm going to use that as a guide to make sure that I'm putting the ground sleeve on the opposite side in the correct location, so I know that these are going to be the perfect distance apart. And then I just continue that process for all 6 of my poles. Once that concrete is set, I'm going to go ahead and remove those poles temporarily so that I can roll out my turf from ATX Turf. This is a huge roll. It is 15.5 feet wide by 65 feet long. So I lift it into place with the tractor and start rolling it out. Now this thing is very heavy, so it would be really nice to have some help for this. But as I'm showing you here, it can be done by one person if you absolutely have to. Now once I've got it all rolled out, I'm going to stretch it out and make sure it's centered in my frame and make sure it's pulled nice and tight all the way across. All right guys, we're at the point in the project where this is actually starting to look like a batting cage. We've got our gravel base down, we've got the turf laid out. Only thing we need to do now is trim the turf and stake it down. Now there is some excess material on the sides that we're going to have to trim off. The roll was actually a little longer than I needed as well, so I'm going to need to cut it down, and we're just going to be able to do that with a utility knife. Then we just need to stake it down so it won't move. Now to do that, we're just going to be using these landscaping stakes. These are green, meant for artificial turf, but you can pick up landscape stakes at your local home store. We're going to run these in about every foot along the perimeter of the turf, and all along the way I'm just going to make sure it's pulled nice and tight as I stake it down. Now this is that extra material on the edges that I mentioned. This is meant to be cut off, so what you want to do is flip over to the bottom and look for that first line of stitching where the turf starts, and you're going to use your razor knife and just run that along that stitch line all the way down, cutting off that excess material. You can do the same thing around any obstructions that you have. You can see here I had to cut around where my concrete for the poles is, and again you can just do that with your razor knife. This roll was slightly longer than I needed it to be. So again, if you need to cut this down to size, that can be done fairly easily with your razor knife and a good sharp blade. Now I'm ready to start staking this down. So to do this, what you want to do is you want to pull back those blades of grass before you put that stake in. That way, as you drive this down, you're not trapping any blades of grass underneath the stake. And once you're done and you fluff that grass up, that stake basically disappears. Now I'm going to do this all the way along the perimeter of my turf, spacing these about a foot apart, using my hammer as a measuring stick between stakes. And while I was doing this, my helpers came back and enjoyed a little fun on the brand new turf and even chipped in to help finish staking it down. Now this next step is not necessary, but it is recommended. So what I'm doing here is adding some infill sand to the turf. To do this, I'm just using a regular seed spreader to spread this sand evenly over the turf. And it's recommended that you add a pound or 2 per square foot of turf. So ultimately I ended up adding 1,000 pounds of sand on top of this turf. So what this is going to do is that sand drops down in between the blades of grass. That's going to weight the turf down and make it quite a bit heavier so it lays nice and flat. It's also a lot less likely to get caught by the wind or something like that. Also, once this is brushed in, it's going to make the blades of grass stand up a little straighter instead of laying down and give it a lot more natural look. So once I've got all my sand spread, and just brush it in against the grain. Now, along with this turf that I got from ATX Turf, I also got this hitting mat. This is great for a batting cage. It not only simulates a real batter's box, but it's also going to help protect the turf so it doesn't get damaged in the hitting area. With the base complete, I'm ready to start prepping and installing the cage kit from Cimarron Sports. So let's get to it. So what I'm doing here is pre-assembling my arches. So I attach the corner pieces from Cimarron Sports to my 10-foot pipe and then secure it with the provided self-tapping screws. I'm also going to pre-drill the holes for the eye bolts that I'm installing later. So I'm going to measure and mark out the center point on this pole and go ahead and drill out that hole. I need to do the same thing on each end, so I'm going to measure half the distance of my net and pre-drill those holes on each end. Next, I need to make sure all these components are good and clean, and to do that I'm just using regular old white vinegar. So I'm going to spray these poles down and then wipe them down good, making sure it's good and clean. This white vinegar is also going to etch the galvanized metal to help make sure that my paint adheres properly to it. Now with that said, you need to make sure that whatever primer you're using for these will adhere properly to galvanized metal. So the primer that I'm using is this universal bonding primer from Rust-Oleum, which Rust-Oleum says will work with galvanized metal. It's very important that you use the proper primer for this so you make sure your paint isn't going to fail on you over time. So I'm going to spray on one good coat of this primer, and then once that's had time to dry, I'm going to go back with this gloss high performance black enamel from Rust-Oleum. Now I recommend that you do at least one coat of the primer and at least 2 coats of this high performance enamel on all of your components. This process is going to help protect the poles, and I think this black enamel is going to give a really great look to our batting cage. Now I'll let that paint cure for at least 24 hours, and now I'm ready to install. So I'm just going to drop the pole down into those ground sleeves that we set into the concrete earlier, and then I secure those together with a self-tapping screw. And I do that for all 6 of my poles. I also decided to add this 8-foot long padding to the bottom of each of my poles. This is not necessary, but it will help prevent ricochets. And you can pick these up in several different colors from Cimarron Sports. Then I'm ready to install the arches. Now this is definitely a 2-person job. We're just going to walk this up the ladder, drop it in place on the poles, and again we're securing each of these joints with a self-tapping screw. And before installing the arches on the poles, it's also going to be a good idea to go ahead and pre-install all of your eye bolts. So we install all 3 of our arches, then we're ready to install the angled supports. These angled supports are going to add a whole lot of strength to your batting cage and help prevent your poles from leaning once that heavy net is installed. The flat part of your angled support is going to be installed 1 foot from the top of the arch, and that just attaches to your pole with one of the provided muffler clamps. Now they do provide ground sleeves for your angled pieces as well, so you can concrete those into the ground. But since I had this wood frame around mine, I decided to anchor to that instead using one of these swivel flanges meant for 1.5-inch pipe. Our poles are up. The only thing left to do now is hang the net, and then we're ready to play some ball. First, I need to prep the provided turnbuckles and cables by connecting them with cable clamps. Then I connect my turnbuckle to one of the end arches, feed the cable through the middle arch, and finally connect it to the other end. Then I'll go back and rotate the turnbuckles until my cable is tight. Then I need to attach my net, so I'm going to stretch that out all the way along the cage and verify that it's oriented correctly. This installation is pretty easy. I'm just going to attach the top rope of the net to the cable using the provided spring clips. So I start by tying my rope up on each end, then I go back and attach it to the cable, and you're going to want one of these spring clips about every 2 feet. Once my first side is done, I'm going to move on to the middle, and then finally attach the opposite side the same way I did the other two. At this point, I'm pretty much done, so now I'm going to move on to some of the accessories. So at this end behind the batter, I'm going to be hanging a backstop. This is just going to help protect the net behind the batter. And when you hang this, you want to make sure you're hanging it from the cables, not from the net itself. Then I'll bring in the L screen that came along with my kit. And with that, my batting cage is complete. I think this looks great, guys. Now it's time to go get my son and break this thing in for the first time. All right, guys, that is it for how to build the ultimate backyard batting cage. I hope this video helped you out. Don't forget, guys, I will have links to this Cimarron Sports batting cage, the ATX turf, the accessories, and all the tools we used for this project linked in the description below. Thanks for watching, guys. Please like, share, and subscribe, and play ball.